Hello, I'm Sonia Chung, and this is Music Lovers. So, my friend, the sister site, the sister podcast, even. So, my friend Tom and I thought we'd have a go at doing a music podcast. So, that should be fun for us because I don't know how we're going to do it. So, really, this is the pilot. So, my friend Tom, who usually joins me on my other podcast, the main one we do, Film Lovers, is joining me for the pilot today. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Sonia. Am I still the work experience boy in this one as well?
Pardon?
Am I work experience boy in this one as well?
Yeah, you are, but we have to be careful that we don't sort of get confused and put on our Film Lovers hat and go into film chat. So we're not doing film talk, we're doing music talk, and we're going to see how we go today, aren't we? Because this is pilot, so we're sort of winging it, really.
Yeah.
And then we'll take it from there. So, how should we start this, Tom? Should we start this by, I don't know, talking about our influences growing up music-wise? Is that a good way to go?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Do you want to go? So this is Tom Jolliffe. He usually joins me quite a lot on Film Lovers. He's a film critic. But we were talking a lot about music as well, and we thought we'll have a go at that. So why don't you take it away, Tom? Start somewhere. It's always a good start,
Yeah.
Start from the beginning and see how we go, and then I'll join you along the way. So, why don't you tell us about your favorite music experiences or influences while you were growing up? I mean, you grew up in the same generation as me because you're like 1 year younger than me. Like, we pretty much grew up in the same generation of music. So take it away. Tell us what your favorite music is, etc. And we'll see how we go.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I grew up. I was from quite a musical family anyway, and I think it's ingrained in my DNA. So, I've got quite a few relatives who have performed music. So I had an uncle who was in a band called Tangerine Dream. They're quite famous. They've done a lot of movie scores as well. So they did, like Risky Business and Near Dark, Thief. But he wasn't in them at that time. He was quite brief in his time in the band. I had another uncle who was in a kind of rock band that had one album in the States. They kind of, they went in and kind of never quite made their mark. And my cousin, he was in a band in the UK as well. So it's kind of just been in the family. And I think, had I not gone into sort of film or screenwriting, there's a chance I might have gone into doing something musical, I think. I've always, so I've always loved music. I think growing up, being from that era, it was all the kind of 80s music that I was really into. So everything that was kind of current when I was younger that I was listening to, I was quite into. So, obviously Michael Jackson, Prince. I really sort of was into rock music as well. So I loved, Bon Jovi, AC/DC, Iron Maiden, all these kind of bands really. Sorry?
Metallica?
Yeah, I like not so much when I was younger, but when looking back I quite liked them. I mean, it's not usually my favorite cup of tea, that level of kind of metal. But but no, I did like them, yeah. I was a bit more of a fan of Guns N' Roses, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, we were quite lucky because in the age of, as we grew up in the 80s and 90s, I mean, I was born in 1980. I'm guessing you were 1981? Were you 1981?
Yeah, 81.
You're pretty much the same as me. So we were kind of exposed to so much diversity of music. That was in the current pop charts at the time. So we were really lucky in that regard. Whereas modern music now is just absolutely awful, isn't it? And that's why we thought we'd do this podcast because
we'll try not to moan too much about modern music
and sound like old fogies.
Yeah. But I think also I was kind of influenced by, I guess, my dad's generation of music as well. So, I guess the Beatles and bands like that and Rolling Stones are kind of timeless, so they're still popular now. But that was kind of when I was growing up. That was almost like a generation or two before. So when you grow up, you're still kind of influenced by the previous generation to some extent. So yeah, Beatles, Stones as well, and I was really kind of into Led Zeppelin.
Okay.
So yeah, when I was sort of about 10, I think I started getting an interest in wanting to play the guitar, because a lot of what I was listening to, was all about, it was all great guitarists. Yeah. So it was all Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, and Van Halen as well. So I was kind of into guitars when I was growing up. So what about you? What were your kind of, musical influences growing up?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I'd say pretty much the same as you. I mean, I guess I remember my mum telling me that when I was about, I can't remember, 4 or 5, maybe even younger, that I used to make her play. Do you remember that Never Ending Story tune by, what was his name?
Lamar. Was it? Yeah, Lamar, yeah.
I used to make her play that, apparently, I think. And also the one that used to drive her crazy with was Come a Chameleon. That was the one I was always asking to play again by, oh God, what was her name? Boy George.
Culture Club.
Culture Club, that's it. So usually it was those two. So I guess they were kind of like the first experiences. And also she said that I was, she remember when I was like a toddler or kid, I used to sort of dance in the supermarkets and sing along to Michael Jackson's Thriller. It sounds very like me.
Yeah.
Doing that kind of thing, dancing and singing in the shops. So yeah, I was a bit of a mischievous toddler, a bit like your Lulu, really.
I was just thinking that, exactly like my Lulu. She's always singing and dancing. So she's got the musical DNA in her.
Yeah. No, that's so cute. I like that. So that was probably like the early exposure was the early 80s. And then obviously sort of as I grew up, like sort of between the ages of, I can't even remember. Like, when it was all that Kylie Minogue, when her first song, The Locomotion, came out.
Yeah.
When was that? Like
87, 88, I think, something like that.
So I would have been about 7-ish. So, I mean, I kind of remember things like that. And that was when the Jason Donovan, Kylie Minogue.
Yeah. I once won a prize, which was a Jason Donovan VHS tape. Yeah, there was this like a sort of Fate that was playing at this pub, and my uncle's band actually were playing at the time, and I'd broken my arm a week or so earlier, so I was miserable the whole day, and they had a dancing competition. So somewhere along the line, someone must have rigged the competition for me to win.
Oh, and, that's so sweet.
Yeah. So they announced me as the winner, but I kind of ran off and hid in a bush because I didn't want to come up in front of everyone. Eventually they dragged me out, and I picked up this Jason Donovan cassette tape, which had like 3 or 4 of his songs on there. It was,
what songs were on it?
It was his Sealed with a Kiss.
Oh, that was one of my favourites.
Yeah, that was the one he did. He did the one with Kylie Minogue as well. They had on there, and
Especially for You.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I can't remember the other one. The other one I can remember the video.
Too many broken hearts in the world.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like a big thing for them at the time because they just came out of Neighbours. So Kylie Minogue was the first one after she just left Neighbours, and then he came shortly afterwards. And then do you remember Stephen Dennis, who played Evil Paul Robinson?
Yeah.
From Neighbours. He had a go, and he made that terrible song.
There was another one that played a character called Henry, and he did.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Carl something. No?
I can't remember his name, but I can just about remember the song.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't even remember that one. I just remember that terrible one by Stephen Dennis. But actually, it was quite good, you know. I can't remember what it was called. You can watch it on YouTube. It's quite
I'll have to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, the video is really like, you know, really, really 80s style. Oh no, it used to go, gonna make you feel good. That one. Do you remember that?
I'm gonna have to look this up. I bet
You'll
it's
have to look
brilliant
it
though.
up. But then they all sort of had a go, and then I guess afterwards was the one who played Henry. And in the 90s, it was Natalie and Imbruglia, wasn't it? They're all sort of.
Yeah, they kind of kept doing it, and then there was Holly Valance as well, wasn't there?
Oh
But
yeah,
by this
Kim.
point, this is when music had died, so you know.
Yeah, that was getting quite desperate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of probably like, and Madonna, obviously, you know, the early phase with like Material Girl and
Yeah.
what was the other one? Yeah, like I think Like a Virgin came out a
Yeah,
bit
living on yeah,
Living on a
like a
Prayer.
prayer.
That's Bon Jovi.
Yeah, like a prayer. Was it like?
Like a Prayer, yeah.
Yeah.
And then and I remember when I was in the car when my mum used to drive us to school, I remember a lot at that time on the radio on the way to school, sort of rush hour time, was Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. That song came on a lot.
Did it
And
always
you know
come
when
on when you were halfway there?
pardon?
Did it always come on when you were halfway there?
I can't remember. I just remember we were sort of in traffic and we were just like, that song came on and it was always
Yeah.
the beginning that sort of, you know, like, that's the song. And then it's funny, isn't it, how your parents' music kind of influenced you as a kid as well. So I remember my mum in the car, it was a bit later, so it must have been when I was about 7ish maybe onwards, I can't remember. She was always listening to, particularly, and we were talking about this very recently, the Terence Trent D'Arby album, his debut album.
Yeah.
I mean, he was big at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he kind of came out of the blocks and was kind of massive because he hit kind of straight away. And because he hit at the time that Michael Jackson and Prince were, you know, at the height of their popularity, and he obviously drew comparisons to both of them. So yeah, he was kind of a big thing.
But that must have been really hard for him as well, because I mean, you know, they were at the peak of their career, if you know, their musical career. So, and they were really, really big at the time. So to be compared to those two must have been really hard, because he was kind of in a league of his own, really, wasn't he?
Yes, I think what he was kind of, he had a little bit of arrogance about him, and I think he kind of he
got quite cocky.
I don't think he upset the press, but I think the press kind of latched onto things he would say and maybe exaggerate it, a bit like they do now, really. You know, they take things out of context, but he could sort of compared himself to the Beatles and things like that. I don't think he necessarily said he was as good or as influential, but in the way that he kind of just broke out and with a, you know, first album that smashed. Yeah. No, that I was the same though. My parents used to listen to his first album, and
really?
that kind of that really kind of, and by virtue, I was listening to it as well. So that became one of my that was one of my early favourites as well.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because for some reason that's the only album I really ever remember my dad listening to a lot. I mean, my dad would always go around the house singing, mainly in the toilet when he was. Don't you know I said that? He'll really annoy you.
You're grounded, Sonia.
He used to sing a lot, sometimes in the bathroom or just sort of, you know what men do, they walk around the house and they sing. He used to sing Bob Marley's I Shot the Sheriff a lot, like so that was probably the first exposure I had, you know, I shot the sheriff. I can't sing. And I think so he's always doing little tunes like this. And obviously, I mean, I must have on some level known about the Beatles and all that kind of music, and, you know, Motown and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was aware of it, but I didn't start listening to it probably maybe 10 onwards, if that makes sense. And I remember my mum playing a lot of the Beatles, like greatest hits in the car a lot. But that was because and it was that one and Motown greatest hits. And I remember those albums specifically because they were the albums that used to be on in the car when we would go on our holidays. So we'd drive from, about July, August, school holidays, we'd drive from our house in Surbiton and we'd go all the way to, is it Folkestone? Take the Eurostar. Or the, when you put your car onto the train. Is that the Eurostar? No, not the Eurostar.
Well, or it might be the Eurotunnel. Was it?
The
Did you go under?
That's it.
Yeah.
Because that was so we did that, and it was really exciting the first time. So that was the first time we did that instead of taking plane. So we did the whole trip from there to my grandparents' house in Oyonnax, which is near Lyon, near France. So it was quite a long trip, but then those two albums were the ones I remember listening to the most in the car. So I was probably about a teenager-ish, coming up to teenager-y mode. We did that trip quite a lot, but I do remember those two albums playing a lot. And and then obviously as the 90s came on, there was kind of like it's funny, isn't it? I mean, at one point in the 90s, the first time we moved to Hong Kong, I can't even remember. It was 91, I think. So I was probably there about 6 months, and then we had to come back to England again. And then we moved back again in like 92 for a year. And I remember the second time we moved back, because we were there for a year, there wasn't much English TV. I mean, there were 2 or 3 channels, but then during the daytime there was like nothing, even on the Chinese channels. So they just cut off transmission, and they just basically do shows and the news, etc. In the morning before everyone goes to school and work, and then they start again about 4 o'clock, and then that's when TV started again. So usually the peak hours, which kind of made sense at the time. But then you had the extra cable channels, and the one we used to watch the most because it was on 24/7 was MTV.
Oh, yeah. Peak period as well, yeah.
Well, I think that time it was MTV Asia, but they used to show a lot of the American shows like like Beavis and so I got quickie voice, hang on. Sorry. So they used to show a lot of the American shows like The Real World. Do you remember that? And Beavis and Butthead and stuff. But then the music videos that would obviously influence you because they were constantly being played. The ones I remember the most were Guns N' Roses. So I think that was probably the first time I had exposure to them. Or maybe it was the first time I was in Hong Kong. I can't keep track. But I remember the second time, that Guns N' Roses November Rain song was always being played. Always, literally seemed to be played. And at the time, those videos were really like epic, weren't they? They were kind of like short films in themselves. We have to be careful we don't go into film territory. But yeah, and the other one I remember sort of having first exposure to, because that was always on MTV, that video, was the Beastie Boys Sabotage video.
Yeah.
So those two I remember the most, but I'm sure early on I had early exposure to those bands too. I must have listened to them because I remember hearing the Beastie Boys, what was that song they had? You've got to fight for your right. That one.
Yeah.
You're gonna fight. When they went to their real frat boy phase.
Yeah. I think that was their first kind of major song, wasn't it?
Their major song. But they so yeah, those two are the ones I kind of remember the most. And then we were really lucky because that was the time Nirvana broke out. Or maybe, they broke out. When did they break out? When was their first out?
I think like 91, I think. So they were sort of 91 to around about whenever it was
when he passed
when he
away.
died, 93, 94.
So the first time I was in Hong Kong, or maybe just before, that was the first time I had exposure to the very first song that came out, which was Smells Like Teen Spirit. And that was huge when it came out, wasn't it? Because it was it was like nothing we'd ever seen or heard before.
Yeah,
and that
it was,
the whole grunge
it essentially killed off the whole kind of type of music, didn't it? It killed off all the hair metal bands and the hair rock, 80s hair rock.
Well, it kind of went, like you said, it kind of went from rock, and then when it went to kind of the 90s, it went into a lot of grunge. Suddenly grunge came out everywhere. And another one that was, I mean, they were, reported to be constantly feuding, but actually the two lead singers got on really well. Pearl Jam, who I also really love, but I didn't listen to any of their stuff probably till about 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm really annoyed at myself because I really wish I had. Because I remember seeing maybe a little bit of exposure to their MTV Unplugged concert, and I was like, I'm not really interested in this. But actually, they were just as good as Nirvana Unplugged, and grunge for some reason translated really well when it was like acoustic. Do you know what I mean? When it wasn't all electrical guitars and all that stuff. So when it was all live, then
it kind of sort of made the sound a little bit cleaner, really, and then you get more sense of because I guess they wanted to have kind of deeper lyrics. That was part of the point, I think. In a lot of those songs, they're all kind of tortured, or at least certainly with Nirvana,
Yeah, I mean that album, I mean, I definitely remember. I'm wondering if you had the album as well, Tom. I definitely remember having that album and playing it a lot in the car as well when we were going on holidays to France. The Unplugged one, and for some reason, a lot of people our generation are still like madly fond and obsessed with that album because it's just so good and so raw. I don't know if that's just me. I mean, are you the same? Like there was Lake of Fire.
I discovered those kind of bands or that kind of genre really a little bit later because while they were kind of coming through, and also Red Hot Chili Peppers as well, kind of coming in.
Yeah, that's one I like.
Yeah, I was still kind of going back to like 80s hair rock, so I was still listening to Bon Jovi and Europe and all these kind of bands. Yeah. So I was kind of still listening to all that, really.
Yeah.
But then obviously, when I was a little bit older, I went back and looked at, things like Nirvana and got into them a bit more. And then more so probably the Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with us, do you remember when we were like kids and teenagers? I remember every Sunday evening I used to listen to Capital Radio because that would give Countdown. And at that time, it was like Top of the Pops, wasn't it? It was the same thing. And when you used to watch Top of the Pops, which was kind of the same thing as MTV because they'd show music videos or sometimes have live. Well, this was a thing, wasn't it? Sometimes they had live performances or they weren't live performances because they're like, they're not even singing to a microphone. But what was I saying? I can't even remember.
Listening to the top 10 on Capital Radio.
Yeah. When you listen Sundays to the the top 40 or whatever, that used to be a big thing on Sundays, and I think that was probably the music that I was exposed to all the time because I was always listening to Capital Radio, or when I was in Hong Kong, it was MTV. So it was the ones that were always on that I sort of remember listening to or seeing to. If that makes sense. So it was always in popular music at the time that was being played a lot of times on the radio or on the TV. So I knew about the bands, and obviously as you got into the 90s, it was a lot of Nirvana. And I remember when it got to sort of 94-ish, 93, 94-ish, that's when the sort of whole Britpop came out, and this is going to get us going now, isn't it? Like Blur. Because I remember Blur.
Then here's a big question: Oasis or Blur?
Blur. What about you?
I think oh, this is difficult because basically when I was starting guitar at the time, and by law, every guitarist, the first couple of songs you learn are Oasis songs. So, you learn Wonderwall and Roll With It. So I was probably in the Oasis camp. I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I like them too, but I think, I don't know, I seem to like Blur more.
I think looking back, I think they're a bit more interesting. There's a bit more range in what they did.
What, Blur or Oasis?
Yeah, Blur.
Yeah. But Oasis were really good too.
Yeah, so I think, Oasis were a little bit unfairly criticised and a little bit underrated for what they did. I think in terms of like all the Manchester music though, that whole scene, I was still a bit more of a fan of the Smiths, even though that's kind of like a generation back. But yeah. But yeah, I was a bit more of a fan of the Smiths, really.
Are they from Manchester?
Yeah, they were kind of part of that first scene, really. So,
okay.
In the mid-80s. Yeah,
I love the Smiths. What's that? There's a video of I think he was doing like they were doing a live performance on a French TV show. I know it was a Belgian one, and they were on a Belgian TV show, and because they didn't want them to sing live, it was a bit like Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
He was just basically sort of what do you call it? like mouth. What do you call it? When they're not singing really, they're just miming along.
Yeah, miming. Yeah.
Whatever it's called. And he's singing into a bunch of flowers and like throwing them around in the air. But no, I love the Smiths. They were so good. And what's funny is that without like these influential bands, I forgot to say one that was really like another big love of mine, Blondie. But I didn't get into Blondie to probably the 90s. I probably started hearing a bit more of them.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit more. But what's funny is about music is that how it, you can tell how they influence other bands and other singers. So if it wasn't for Blondie, we wouldn't have had Madonna's sort of punky rock, not punky rock, but sort of punk phase. Do you know what I mean? Because Blondie were very much punk rock type thing, weren't they? A bit, and they were a very big influence on Madonna. And then obviously it sort of goes on. It's like a ripple effect because Madonna's affected, Lady Gaga. So she was very much so they kind of go on from each other. And another one that we need to talk about is Jeff Buckley, because Jeff Buckley was very heavily influenced by people like the Smiths and Nina Simone and Edith Piaf. So like music's very good for doing that, and you can tell how it kind of you hear bits of it in other bands or other singers' songs. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, I think it does. Yeah, I think also when sometimes you can be a little bit too heavily influenced by one style or one person. I think some of the best artists kind of take from different things, don't they, and kind of create their own sound. I guess the Beatles and the Stones were kind of famous for doing that. Back in the day.
Well, they were very different, weren't they? Because when did the Stones come out? Did they come out at the same time as the Beatles, roughly?
They were early 60s. The Beatles kind of came, so I think the Beatles were about 60, 61, and then the Stones were about 64, something like that. So it wasn't a big difference, but yeah, they were both sort of heavily influenced by kind of black music, blues and rock, Chuck Berry, bands like that. So they kind of fused that with early British pop, which is a little bit more kind of, by today's standards, it's quite quaint. So the way they fused those together was interesting and made it a bit more timeless, I guess.
Yeah, but what's funny is that, I remember the Beatles being a bit more, I think, I don't want to say this, but like a bit more safer than the Rolling Stones, because the Rolling Stones were a lot more kind of like, they were definitely rock and roll.
Yeah.
Like, especially
you certainly see that the Beatles are doing kind of, I guess it's back then it wasn't deemed safe, but it kind of seems It's not too much different from British pop from like a few years
Yeah.
before. But then, you know, the Stones came straight in doing kind of very bluesy music.
Thing. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
very different, wasn't it?
Yeah. But then the Beatles kind of, they got a bit edgier as they went on. And, you
Yeah,
know, they
that's
had,
true.
you know, songs like Get Back, which are quite sort of bluesy and, yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of like the same thing as Elvis, because when Elvis came out, I mean, he was really different because
Yeah.
no one would play, because he was from the South, like deep South, you know, and they obviously had the very, at the time, there's very strict laws about blacks and whites not
Yeah.
mingling. They wouldn't even play his music, would they? Because
No,
they thought
because,
he was
yeah,
a black person.
they would expect like a white artist to have been playing very kind of old-fashioned sort of folky rock music, yeah.
Yeah,
But he was obviously more influenced by, you know, the
church
black
gospel
artists.
music.
Yeah,
Yeah, which was very. I mean, he became hugely popular, obviously, but you know, when he came out, he was very
yeah,
like, you know, parents. The parents were like mortified. Who's this young man shaking his hips about and all this stuff? I mean, he was, you know, he was kind of like the then Picasso, I guess, in a way where Picasso was also very controversial when he was, you know, the famous artist at the time.
yeah,
So yeah, but it's funny how those bands sort of influence other singers and bands as they go along, you know, and you can tell. But I think the ones that have managed to stick around the longest are the ones who are able to transition different genres. So, for instance, you know, I can't say, I don't want to slag her off because I really like her earlier work, but Madonna, for instance, like she's been around so long, but I think that's because, I mean, to be honest, now it just seems like she's getting desperate. I mean, she's a lot, do you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's getting too much. But in her earlier phase, especially the 90s, which were really good as well, you could definitely see a transition in, you know, she became sort of popular. And at one point, she became kind of more sort of romantic ballads. Like she did that album with Massive Attack. There was a song of Massive Attack. And they were all kind of, you know, sort of romantic ballad songs. And then I mean, my most favorite album of hers was the one she did with William Orbit. And that was probably her most successful one, The Ray of Light.
yeah. That was
And that's
kind of like when she reinvented herself, wasn't it? Because
yeah,
she'd had
but
like
that's
3 or 4 years of being out of the limelight somewhat.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so she had to
But
kind of,
that's
yeah,
yeah. But then she really kind of proved herself as being not a pop star, but actually an artist. And it's a shame she never kind of stuck to that because that was her best phase, I think. Do you know what I mean? That was
yeah,
when she was at her most creative, where now it just seems like she's trying so hard to pretend she's still young. I mean, she's had so much cosmetic surgery. Um, I mean, she's got bounces of energy. She's amazing, you know, when she does live performances and stuff. But she's trying to just stay with the times, and it doesn't
yeah.
work as much because you can tell she's not sticking to what
Well, you
her
know, she's
creative
trying to,
wants.
I know that it's interesting that she's trying to kind of stay very contemporary whenever she kind of
Yeah,
reinvents herself. But you know, you can't sort of compete with, you know, the 20-year-old artists that are out there
no,
doing the same things as
no,
them. But then, you know, maybe she doesn't want to kind of go throwback to what she was doing in the 80s or 90s.
yeah,
So it's difficult sometimes. I mean, because she's kind of been quite a chameleon in what she's done.
mm,
It's difficult to have an identity. Whereas if you're someone like AC/DC, they can, you know, from 1970 to sort of now, even when there's been different members, and they've always had exactly the same style pretty much. There's been little variation, but you know, the fans expect that and want that. So they can bring out a new album quite safely by sticking to what they do best.
and they've got their core audience, I guess, where they're
Yeah,
not like having to worry about constantly trying to get a different audience to come in, and then that would
yeah,
also jeopardize the ones that they had before, the fans they had
yeah.
before, who
But I
sort of
think,
give up.
yeah, they, you know, they still manage to pick up new audiences who kind of, I guess it's their dad listens to something and their kids think, oh,
Mm.
that's quite good. I mean, Lulu likes AC/DC when I play it, so You know, she'll be the next generation fan. But yeah, so I think that's the difficult thing with Madonna. Like, you know, like you say, you like the William Orbit phase of her career. I
Yeah.
think my favorite album was probably Like a Prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, her 80s stuff was really good too, like
yeah,
Borderline and, you know, like a Virgin Material Girl and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And then obviously there was like her huge hit, you know, Vogue. That was like, and actually that was really clever of her because she tapped into the gay scene, and nobody knew what Vogue was, but apparently that was like an underground thing. So she's very clever with tapping into, you know,
yeah,
all sorts of styles and what's going on in modern times and stuff.
yeah.
And at the time in the gay scene, instead of, you know, getting into fights, they would vogue it out. So they would do like, you know, they would show
Yeah,
off their dance moves, and that's what she tapped into. So she
yeah.
was really good at doing that.
I mean,
But now,
she always appreciated that fan base. I mean, because it was a fan base, so you know, you tap into that.
yeah. So that was another really good phase of hers as well, because she became, and then there was at one point when she got very slutty, wasn't there?
Yeah, and they did the
um,
thing with was that the music video with Britney Spears as well, wasn't it? It was a little bit kind of desperate.
was that the early 2000s with Me Against Music? That was Britney Spears.
Yeah, something like that. I
Yeah.
mean, that was the stage where Madonna kind of lost me, and then when she did the video with Ali G,
Oh, music.
yeah. So I wasn't, yeah, I was starting
Yeah,
to, yeah,
go off a
yeah,
bit.
a little bit,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then she kind of went through that phase where she sort of, I think it was in the early 2000s, because I remember I was working like as a red coat entertainer in animation in Spain or something. So I was like 25 or something. And I remember that's when her, well, 25, 27, and that's when her sort of ABBA influence came out, and she started doing all the songs like Hung Up and stuff. And you could hear the, you know, the ABBA melodies playing in the background. So she kind of reinvented herself, or tried to, as a 70s sort of, you know, icon with the hairstyle and everything. But yeah, it's a shame because she was really good at that. But she hasn't, you know, and a lot of them, when they get older, they either stick to the stuff that they're known for, and then they know that they've got their constant followers and fans there, or
yeah,
they kind of branch out and go into the writing side or the producing side, or they become more sort of just wise and do more sort of you know, actually they make lyrics that make sense. Do you know what I mean? Where it's not just sort of spouting out stuff.
yeah,
But I think she was very good at the time because she was very good at, like you said, reinventing herself, and she was very good for tapping into different, I guess, genres in a way. But I mean, another one. I mean, there are other bands that have done really well with sort of changing, and singers that have done really well with, you know, crossing over genres and stuff. I mean, I can think of another one. Blur's been really good for that. You mentioned that because they've stuck around
yeah,
for a long time, even though they broke up and they kind of got back together again. The only problem they had was they could never crack into the US market, could they? Because of the grunge phase, and that was at the time. That was
yeah.
the only
And I
thing that
think,
was
you
going to
know,
play them
sometimes
over.
it was a little bit of an acquired taste, like something like Park Life. You know, we love that over here, but Americans might listen to
Yeah.
it and be a bit confused by, you know, is that good? Is it? I don't know.
Oh, God. Well, that was very much a kind of a sort of a teenage, early 20s rebel type phase, wasn't it, for them?
Yeah,
But then they've got like, and you know, boys and girls and all that kind of stuff. And then, I mean, I remember like at the time, to be honest, I did as well. Like I went to girls' school, and the girls had a massive crush on Damon Albarn, and we were like, who do you fancy more? Is it Damon or is it Alex James? And I was like, Damon, Damon.
they were
um,
definitely the better looking band. I'll say that.
yeah, compared to Oasis.
Yeah,
um, but I like that, you know, as they've gotten older, you know, there was that constant, you know, rumored feud between, and there's usually, this always goes on between, bands like, oh, these bands hate each other. So there was the Oasis and Blur one, but actually as they got much older, Damon and who's the one that's still going, because the brothers are very much
yeah,
against each
kind
other.
of, it's
Noel,
if it's one of the more,
it.
yeah, it's probably Noel if it's the more reasonable
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's done quite a lot of stuff with Damon Albarn now. So they've actually got, they get on really well, because they were talking about how that whole Britpop phase was like just amazing, the music wise. And then that kind of brings us on to the Britpop phase, was kind of like the early, 94 on upwards. That was kind of, remember that, and there was things like Take That. That was another big thing at the time. There's boy bands.
I remember really hating them back in the day. I think because I was sort of growing up, and I think it was like it was that thing that, well, girls like Take That. I don't like them. I like Oasis.
Trying to be hard.
Yeah, trying to be hard at 12 or 13. But like looking back in retrospect, I kind of look back and appreciate them now, because they're so much better than the modern equivalents.
Oh God! Yeah.
I'll hear Back for Good come on the radio, and I'll be like just quietly humming along.
But what's funny is that the very first boy band, because this kind of brings us back into the 80s, the very first boy band that started off that whole boy band trend was New Kids on the Block, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then all these other ones came along, and it was like Take That, and then I think later on it was like NSYNC and all that. I never got into NSYNC, but I think New Kids on the Block were the ones that sort of, they broke out like late 80s, didn't they?
Yeah.
And to the 90s, they were the ones that set off that whole boy band thing. And I remember when we were kids, like, I don't know if you did, you might not want to admit it, but I used to buy the Smash Hits album and the Smash Hits magazine. And there used to be the lyrics and stuff to songs, and like the video, and not the videos, the photos and interviews of the current stars at the time. And I'll be like you're like, oh my God, I fancy Jordan so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's funny, like that's another thing about how like those trends sort of carry on. But films are like that. We don't want to go into films, but that sort of has the same effect, doesn't it? So if that does really well, then they're going to sort of carry on the trend, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I have a little bit of an embarrassing story about a boy band.
Go on then. I'll tell you mine after.
Yeah, as we're on the subject, this was fairly recently. I was in my kitchen and I had the window wide open. My kitchen kind of it overlooks like a lake, but there's also a public footpath about 3 foot in front of my front door. And I was sort of doing the washing up, miles away I was. And then I almost didn't realize I was doing it, but I was singing along to I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys quite loudly. And I sort of looked up from what I was doing, and there was this woman walking past just looking right at me, and she looked a little bit ashamed of me. She was, just looking at me with pity. But I thought I was doing a very good job of nailing those high notes, I must say.
You know what? I'll tell you a bit of a boy band story. And this is going to kind of cross over into film lovers territory. So I'm going to try to sort of keep it as much to the music part more.
I'll allow it.
But when I was about 25, I came back from working in Spain, and my friends at the time, well, they're still going really strong. They run their own independent film company, and they did a low budget film lovers group. That's what I want to talk about. Sorry, they did a low budget horror film, so basically what happened was the wardrobe person dropped out at the last minute, and they were really screwed. And that happens quite a lot on those sort of low budget films.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, we talked about this, didn't we? So I did mention, before, like, if you ever need a hand, I'd like to be involved. And I said, well, Sonia, she might like to help out. So basically they called me up and said, well, are you doing a thing? This person's dropped out. We need someone to help with the wardrobe department. So basically I was kind of the wardrobe department, but I was also in the art department because it kind of sort of was being swapped over, So they gave me a load of numbers and they gave me a load of cash, which for a 25-year-old was amazing. But actually it wasn't cash for me. It was cash to go out and get their costumes. And I had to get several replicas. And I had to call up all the actors to ask for their sizes and measurements. And looked up, like, this call sheet. I mean, a lot of them I didn't know who they were. But one of them, and I'm not joking, one of them was Stephen Gately from Boys and I used to have, when I was 15, 16, and I was at a girls' school at this time, okay? So there were no boys around, and it was all this, like, boy band thing, and that was the only thing I had to look forward to, all Blur and all the stuff in the current charts. So I was, like, really into boy bands, like Take That and Boyzone, because they came out after Take That, I think. And then I had to actually meet him because he could do a phone chat to talk about measurements and stuff. So he came in to the location and I had to talk to him. And it was really hard, Tom, I tell you, for a 25-year-old to not kind of go into the 15-year-old mode, because in my head I was screaming, Stephen Gately. And obviously I had to be very professional. So I managed really well, but obviously the 15-year-old in me was still screaming and shouting, and I wanted to go tell the old girls at school that used to, go to school with, like, ha ha. So that was fun. Oh, and another couple of guys, I guess you could call them, was a boy band at the time. And I remember meeting them because I used to be part of an Amdram group when I was a teenager. And they used to do their rehearsals there. Was Anton Deck, when they came out with their song, Let's Get Ready to Rumble. They were really big at that point from being like pop stars. So yeah, but that wasn't a good phase for them, really, was it? After that, when they went through that boy band phase. But so it was definitely like, and then we have to go on to Alanis Morissette, Tom. This is going to set us off for hours. But that was one of the albums I bought when I was about 15 or 16. That was just after my GCSEs. And that was her debut album, wasn't it? And nobody had heard an album like that. And for some reason, that's the album I listened to the most in the summer with the windows wide open. Really loud. And I'm sure the neighbours hate me for it.
Yeah. Is it when you sing along as well?
Your daughter does as well, apparently, doesn't she?
Yeah. So if I've got it on in the car, I have to have a little bit of a sing along, quite loud, because you got to get. If you're singing along to Alanis, you have to really kind of give it some welly, don't you? So you've got to let out all that internal feminist rage.
Exactly, and her angsty, like screw you, screw the world, and you're very much like that when you're a teenager, don't you? Like, nobody understands me.
Yeah. So no, and I really liked that album because it felt kind of it was well written for a start, and it was very genuine. Yeah.
Very raw as well.
Yeah. But I know, from she never kind of lived up to that, or at least for me, from like the second album onward. I think sometimes when you've got all that edge and angst, and
it's hard to
it's hard to keep that when you've kind of made it and all of a sudden you're a millionaire and it's all rosy. So it didn't quite have that rage in the second and third albums.
No, and also you think about it, like, if your first album or your first film, so this is kind of going into film lovers, but it's the same thing, isn't it? Because it's is a hugely popular thing, then it's hard to top that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So or what they could do is just kind of swap and change the format and switch it up completely. So that was probably.
I think that's what she did. Yeah. That is a very different her second album is a very different style, and it's I have a feeling she might have separated from the songwriter who kind of produced a lot of the first album as well. So just in terms of the way the songs are put together, it probably had a little bit more additional craft on it as well. I think she just went a different route in the second one, which wasn't for me really, but I'd still love that first album.
Yeah. And also my sister told me about that album, because we were talking about this as well. My sister Faye, ages ago, we were saying that she told me that apparently, and you can so tell this in that album Jagged Little Pill, that she wrote that about an ex-boyfriend, which you can so tell. Especially the second one, where I'm not going to repeat the lyrics, all of them.
That's something about whining and dining.
No, the one where she says, I'm not quite as well. I thought you know. And she goes, did you forget about me? Simplicity. That one.
Yeah.
I can't sing.
Well, that's the one I usually sing along to in the car quite loud.
Yeah, I was going to say, by the way, do you blank out the rude words? Or
because I'm in my car and I feel like I'm safe, I just blurt them out. Until I realise that there's someone in the back seat, and I kind of remember, and I think, bugger.
Oh no! Oh, Tom. Well, she's going to pick it up from somewhere eventually, isn't she? Not that that's good exposure, but yeah, I can imagine it must be very easy. But no, my sister said that she apparently wrote that about an ex-boyfriend, and that whole album, you can so tell it's about that. The majority of it, anyway. Yeah. But then, can you imagine? So you write that album, and then obviously it's like a film where it takes a long time to get people to invest in it and to distribute it, and so she was probably really young. I mean, she was young when the album came out. She was in her 20s, but she would have been a bit younger. And then Madonna founded her with somebody else, and then that's how she became really big. So she wrote that whole album mostly about her ex-boyfriend, who was obviously really annoyed her. Pissed her off. Yeah. And but then she had to sing those songs live for like God knows how long. Do you know what I mean? Like in concert, on tour and everything, for maybe 2 years. So you're basically reliving everything that you've just got out and because I mean, you think about it, she was in a recording studio. So actually, and she said it on an interview, much later. Now she's a mum and she's a lot older, etc. So she's got a different perspective. But she's like, the interviewers were like, well, it was really raw and different at times. She goes, yeah, but actually, you know what? It wasn't that raw because actually I was safe and protected because I was doing it all in the studio. So it was just me and somebody else. So it wasn't like there were people around, and obviously you're doing it live in front of all these people. And you're singing about this horrible ex-boyfriend who was really nasty to you. And there's that secret song at the end I never knew about. Did you ever hear that secret song at the end? If you keep playing.
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I think if I leave the CD running, it normally comes on.
Yeah, and I never knew about that till I saw something on the internet, because I used to just assume the last song was the last song. But actually, if you keep it playing, it just sort of comes on. So basically, there's no music. It's just her voice singing about how she found him in bed with somebody else or something like that. But yeah, I mean, her voice is amazing. And it's a shame she kind of, I guess you can't say to that kind of phase really, because she was in her 20s. So, do you know what I mean? You would kind of change and your perspective of life, and things would change as well. Yeah. But I think she got a lot more creative older.
I think at least she did kind of diverge a little bit. Whereas you look at someone like Adele, and like every album seems to be about a bastard ex-boyfriend.
Adele's miserable. Like,
I know, it's like every. Oh my! You have to wonder. It's like 4 albums now, all about,
It's
you know, different
about
exes. And there are two people. There's a certain consistent pattern here, and it's all about her ex-boyfriends.
Are they all about her ex-boyfriends then? Every single song?
Every song that I hear, or every one that seems to be the big one, because I don't particularly listen to the albums, but the
No, I
ones
just
that,
read
yeah,
the
that
lessons.
really seem to take off are all about, an ex being a bastard, or
To somebody else who becomes one.
yeah, I'm sure she's got like album tracks that are about something else, but I don't really particularly listen to the albums.
No, I don't listen to any of her stuff. I just get really annoyed with them. But what's funny is that when she's in interviews, she's really lively and happy. So I'm just like,
Yeah,
I can't listen to you. You're too depressing. She's a bit like, and I feel so bad for saying this, but do you remember when James Blunt came out and that first song? Oh my God.
yeah,
What was it? You're beautiful. And then he got so much flack about that. But actually, he's a really funny guy, isn't he? He's really good. He kind of
he's really
takes it.
funny on Twitter as well when he responds to like
Yeah,
hateful fans and
he's really
things.
good for taking the piss out of himself and sort of biting back at fans and stuff. But I really like him as a person. I think he just got a lot of flack because his music can be a bit depressing. And talking about depressing music, Radiohead, right? Tell us about them, Tom. I like them. They're really good musicians. I just can't
Yeah.
listen to them for too long. I want to kill myself.
No, it's a bit odd. I never quite got into Radiohead, but I do like a few of their songs.
No,
I
they
did,
are really good
yeah,
songs. Like, what's the one of the music video where he's got like a sort of astronaut helmet on and it's slowly filling up with water? Is that No Surprises? I think it's No Surprises.
I'm not too sure really. I was always a
Yeah,
bit more of a fan in that kind of sort of miserable kind of music, I
yeah,
guess, of Joy Division. Um,
yeah.
but oddly, I only ever listen to Joy Division when I'm in a good mood. I don't know why that is. I mean, they're
Well,
all quite,
tear us apart. That's
yeah,
such a good song, though. But that's
it
not a
is,
good
yeah.
song to listen to if you're in a bad place, because that really is actually quite a dark song.
Yeah,
You
all
know.
their songs were so dark because obviously they were written by Ian Curtis, and he had,
Oh, okay. I didn't
yeah,
realize because that was the only song I really heard of them,
yeah,
and I thought like they did some. I heard the one because I think they changed their name to Blue Order afterwards, didn't they?
yeah. So I mean, that
And
was what after the lead singer, had committed suicide.
yeah,
The remainder of the band, they kind of changed to Blue Order.
yeah.
So they still had a slight. They had some of the style kind of carry over, but then it was a lot more upbeat and I guess lighter.
Mm.
Yeah, but I always,
Yeah.
I've always really liked Joy Division because the music was very raw and kind of genuine.
They
And
were
it's,
from Manchester as well, weren't
yeah,
they? So they were
they
probably
were another Manchester band. Yeah,
Yeah, because they were very much. I mean, I remember. I think it was Liam or Noel talking about how they were really into that. The Manchester. Because at that point, the Manchester popular music was really influential, and I think they influenced them as well. So there was like you said, the Smiths. Oh, I love
yeah,
the Smiths. Joy Division. I didn't realise they were from Manchester. So that's and who are the other ones that were really popular and they really influenced them? The Stone
Stone
Roses.
Roses. Yeah, yeah,
I like them. There was the two songs, "Fool's Gold" and "I Wanna Be Adored." That one. The same music video, and then they kind of just stopped, didn't they? Which was so sad because they were so good.
yeah. I'm
Um,
not too sure why, but I mean, I guess a lot of these bands just break up. Maybe there's a lot of angst and
Creative tension.
yeah, tension. Yeah, and
Yes.
obviously that was very famous with Oasis as well between the two brothers.
When did that happen exactly? When did they actually break apart?
I mean, they were on the verge of it almost from the beginning, and they used to
Oh,
get
were
into
they?
they used to get into proper like fights and scraps and massive arguments. But it just
Then.
finally it came to a head, and they decided to split. But I think
So,
that was it would have been almost 20 years ago.
so was the argument just purely against the brothers, not the rest of the band? And what were they arguing about? Like one of them wanted to be more of the vocals, or
It was
I don't
probably
know.
just in a load of different things, but one probably wanted to have a bit more involvement in the writing process, which would have been Liam, and then the other, Noel, would probably have wanted to do a few more things up front. He sung the odd one here and there, but they tended to be album tracks. But and then Liam would write the odd one here and there on an album track, but all the famous ones tended to be Noel would write it, Liam would sing it.
Okay,
and I think there's a bit of there's a bit of friction with them wanting to kind of flip that up.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the problem though. If you work with friends or brothers or sisters, I think. But then usually, I mean, having said that, I just thought of another band that have done really well, and they've stuck together for a very long time. I think it's two brothers and two cousins, the Kings of Leon. They're all related, and they're still going strong.
I didn't realise they were related. Actually, I never quite realised that.
Yeah, hang on, I'm going to find out. I think it's two brothers and two cousins, Kings, and they've been going on for ages, and they're still really popular.
I mean, they've probably been going on longer than I've kind of realised they were around, because I kind of got in. I sort of realised who they were, or kind of heard about them after Sex on Fire.
Yeah, they've been going for quite a long while, and I never realised. I started listening to them because I remember a girl I worked with in like 2007 or 8 told me about them, and then I listened to one of their songs, and then I ended up getting the album, or my sister had the album, I can't remember, and I really got into them. So it's 3 brothers, Caleb, Nathan, and Jared, and their cousin Matthew. So yeah, they're all related, and they're from Nashville, Tennessee. But they've been going for a long time, and they're like alternative rock or rock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've done hugely well. But yeah, I don't know. What were you were saying? That were you a big fan of theirs, or you ever listened to them?
I kind of got into them for a little bit. When they broke out in a big way after that. Obviously, that album and that song, "Sex on Fire."
Yeah, that was
that kind of They were sort of a little bit underground before then. And that kind of nudged them up. So I quite liked them because generally, without sounding like an old man, I don't listen to much new stuff basically after in this century. So,
well, I'm the same as you. I think I sort of stopped probably. I mean, the early 2000s was still good. So I'd say probably up to that point, that's when I sort of cut off really, and then it got into, well, that sort of started early 2000s as well, but it wasn't that bad at the time. It was when that whole like, what was before X Factor? It was the first
Pop Stars or Pop Idol or something. Yeah,
and all those shows started happening, and that's when it sort of started coming out really. But the first one, who were the very first one, was Hearsay. They didn't last long, did they?
No.
They lasted like what? Yeah, one song, and that was it.
One album or something. Liberty X were the same. I can't even believe I remember the names.
Where did Liberty X come out of one of those shows?
They did. I think they were the runners up. The same year, but then they came out as well. And then you had Gareth Gates and Will Young.
Yeah, but what's really funny is that of those ones, Gareth Gates came up. Well, I think Will Young and Gareth Gates. No, who won? It was Will Young, wasn't it? But then Gareth Gates was the runner-up.
I can't remember really. I have a feeling it was Gareth Gates that won, but obviously Will Young had the better career, didn't he? In the end, I think
he did better the long-term one, and then he went into like musical theatre, and actually he studied musical theatre. He went to Arts Ed, so he suits that sort of musical theatre really well, and he's done really well on the stage. So I think he recently did the Moulin Rouge or Strictly Ballroom musical. But yeah, he's done really well, I think, long-term run. Gareth Gates seems to have just vanished, I think. I mean, he was really good for like, because obviously he had that stutter, and he's really managed to master it because he's had lots of help with it. But he was really good because he was very good for promoting, you know, the struggles he had with it, and promoting
Yeah.
it in to the people who had the same problem. So I really like, and actually I thought he was a really nice guy. They both are, I think, but um, those sort of shows don't really do them justice, I think, in the long term run.
No, no, it's that whole. It's an extreme version of like how the record industry works anyway, with manufacturing people, but it's like a very extreme version of it. And they tend to dump people very quickly. So if the first song doesn't really take off, they'll put out your album with minimal kind of marketing, and then that's it. You'll get dumped. So it seems to have happened to a lot of them.
Yeah.
So there's only been like a handful of artists that actually kind of did well from it.
Well,
I
Kelly
think.
Clarkson did really well. She's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
going.
from the American side, yeah, and then Leona Lewis. But even then, she kind of went a little bit quiet as well
Yeah, I
after a
remember
few
that.
years.
Yeah. So, but then you know what? Having said that, a lot of those bands are kind of manufactured. You think about it. I mean, Take That was kind of put together, wasn't it?
Yeah,
They started off by having an advert in the boy band. No, it was an advert in a magazine, or maybe that was Boyzone. Those sort of things happen quite a lot. And then the Spice Girls, it was the
yeah, that
same
was the same.
thing.
Yeah,
So they just sort of advertised it a different way. So at that time, it was all in the newspapers and stuff, or magazines, like, oh, so and so record company are trying to get a boy band together, and then they audition loads of people, and that's how they got Spice Girls together. Who was the Spice Girls manager? And then they fired him.
or was it
Simon.
Simon Fuller? He was the guy that,
Yeah.
yeah, he was behind Pop Stars originally, so he never got in front of the camera, but he was one of the key kind of forces in
Yeah.
putting that show together.
Yeah.
Mm.
He was. It's funny, isn't it? Like Simon Cowell as well. He's obviously a really big one. I mean, he was dirt poor when he first started out, wasn't he? When he was broke. I mean, look at him now. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah,
he's very clever, because actually he's not only a manager. He owns that show, so he's also the boss of that show. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone behind that show works for him, so he's the big boss of that as well. So he's actually been very clever with the way he makes his money, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Um,
I think he just took a gamble on it working, and it paid off really. It
yeah,
was, yeah, it was a kind of like a throwback to old shows of the 70s. They used to have so many of these kind of talent shows back in the 70s, and then they kind of
yeah,
went out of fashion, and yeah, they brought it back.
yeah. I mean, he's notorious, isn't he, for being a bad guy with some of the comments he says to people. I think he's calmed down now that he's a dad.
Yeah, you almost, in this generation, you can't really do that anymore, because you'll just
No,
have people on your case the whole time. The kind of,
that's true.
yeah,
And yeah, but at the same time, he's notorious for, when it was him and Louis, what was his name? The one that got Boyzone together, Louis Walsh. Is it
yeah, Louis
Louis?
Walsh, yeah.
He was quite notorious for some of his comments. I mean, he was meant to be the nice guy, but actually he could be quite cruel as well in some of his
Well, I
comments.
think what he tried to do is he started off as the nice guy, and then he realised Simon was getting all the attention, so he changed
Oh, I
tactic a bit.
see.
Yeah.
Tactic.
Not that I watched it that much. I mean, the first few years for the novelty, I kind of watched it a little bit, and then it kind of wore off. Really, I always
Yeah.
preferred the beginning where you had saw the terrible acts. So that was always the more interesting part to me, because
Do you
a
know
lot
what's
of
funny?
yeah.
Sorry, so I carry on what were you saying? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I know, just because a lot of the what was supposed to be the the finalists and the good acts weren't actually that good. So
They
Yeah,
were they?
no, I mean you had the exceptions, obviously, like Leona, was very talented. But so I always found there was more enjoyment watching the kind of really bad acts at the beginning of the show, the comedy acts, or there'd be
Well,
someone
they're
really,
the one everyone watches the show for. That
yeah,
they don't want to watch the good people. They want to watch the ones that fall on their arse.
yeah. But I
That
mean,
fall on, and
yeah, they
that's why I
toned it down
watched it.
though. I think they stopped doing that because it felt at some stage it felt like they were exploiting,
Well, it's like a
people.
circus, really, isn't
Yeah, a
it?
little bit of a circus, and some of the people clearly might have had mental health issues, and they were kind
Yeah.
of exploiting that for comedy value. So yeah,
And they're
so they
very
yeah
clever with editing those shows as well. Do you know what I mean?
yeah
I remember, I'll tell you a funny story, right? I remember once, right, I was about 25, 26. I worked in a call center, right? And working in a call center is the most monotonous job you ever
I know.
have.
I did 2 weeks of that, and that was
I
enough for
did.
me.
It was awful, and it was for charities. So in a way, it was good, but I didn't last long because they basically got rid of me because I wasn't making my targets. And they were quite mean because they were saying to everyone, we're not letting go of people, don't worry. And they were secretly like sending you to the office and saying, well, listen, after so many weeks, you're not hitting your targets, we have to let you go. And they let you go. So they were doing it and they were really mean. Um, and a lot of those people that work in call centers are actors.
Yeah,
Or musicians, struggling musicians, because they have to work, like evenings or weekends. So basically, I sort of still go by that thing now, that schedule, because I teach those times, so I can go up for auditions and whatever and do self
yeah,
tapes during the time or whatever when my agent needs me to. So, or jobs they send me to. So a lot of the time, that's why there's a lot of actors and musicians that do those kind of jobs, or waitressing or waitering and bar stuff. But there was one guy that was there, right? And I remember a girl who I was quite friendly with told me that apparently he went on one of those X Factor shows and he got slammed so badly by by them, like, by
yeah.
Salman Khan. And then I spoke to him the year before, and I actually said he had a really bad audition, and she goes, "I recognise him," and I went, "Oh, really?" And so I never really watched those shows because I got fed up. Um, and I went, "Really?" And then at one point we started talking, me and him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go for an audition for X Factor." So they're quite mean, those people, because what they do is they get their hopes up and they say, yeah, come on, audition. But actually, it's just for the sake of the show's ratings. It has nothing to do with their talent. So really, like you say, they're kind of exploiting them for just to get the
Yeah,
ratings up so people can watch
yeah,
the bad ones. Because to be honest, that's the only reason why I watched it, for the bad ones. And when they get good, I don't want to see that, so I never watched afterwards. So I couldn't care less.
yeah,
I just wanted to watch the ones, that were really cheesy or really, really cringeworthy. And there were so many of them. There was one, oh, bless him. There was one guy, and I felt so bad for him. He was so sweet. It was a Chinese guy called William Hung. Do you remember
I remember
him?
him. Yeah,
And he his audition Ricky was it Ricky Martin's She Bangs? And it was so bad. But I like the fact that in those cases when they know that they're struggling with their English and stuff, they kind of say, thanks, but no thanks. They're really nice to them, I think, in that way, to those kind of people. But then there were ones that you could tell there was something not quite right, and they were really not very nice to those
no.
people. And
And then
you
the way they
didn't,
edit the shows. I mean,
yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly. But then, and there was one time when one of them was really mean to this 16-year-old girl. And actually, it was Sharon Osbourne, Louis Walsh, and Simon Cowell. And one of them, it was one of the guys. I think it was actually Louis Walsh. said, "You'll never make it. You're really bad." And I don't think it was actually Simon Cowell. He was actually the good guy in that situation because she was so young. And
Yeah.
Simon, what am I talking about? Sharon Osbourne, who actually is behind her husband's career because she's his manager. So basically, she got him off the ground. So she's a businesswoman in her own right. She actually turned around and said, she's 16 years old. Come on, and she walked her out because this poor girl was crying after, what he said to her. And she was really upset with him. And she said to the mum, they said no, take care of her, etc. So in that way, I kind of like the fact that one of them stood up for them. But those kind of manufactured sort of things, like shows and stuff, they've always been around, or they've always been put together by people we don't know about. The Jackson 5, for instance, I mean, you think about it, they were manufactured by their father, weren't they? I mean, he was
Yeah.
notorious for horrendously cruel and strict and whipping them with belts and stuff. But that was because he wanted a career in music and he never made it. So, his poor
Yeah.
kids would have.
So yeah, he had a very, very much, a lot of control over what they did. I
Yeah.
think, a lot of the times now it's all about like the, marketing, and marketers end up controlling these acts. And it's similar that, you've got this force that controls everything you kind of do. And then at the drop of a hat, they can kind of just dump you.
Yeah. But it's notorious for that, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's the really dodgy thing. I guess music's a bit like, not so, I think it's more dangerous for young people now because one, and I remember talking to someone about this, you think the publishing rights would get easier, but actually they don't get all the
No.
money they deserve because at the end of the day, they don't get paid royalties, do they? I don't think.
Well,
They only get
royalties are very kind of limited nowadays because the whole market has changed. It's all about kind of downloads now, and they tend to get poorer deals. I mean, it's similar in film. Your back end deals and royalties and things like that are not anywhere near like they used to be.
Yeah.
Just because the market's tighter, people are spending less money on pushing out new acts, and they're not investing in them because they know that the returns aren't as good.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of bands that their kind of money making comes from touring and doing live shows, because selling music and selling albums doesn't get them anywhere near as much.
Yeah.
So like a band like Iron Maiden, they live by doing tours, because that's where all the money is.
Well, that
Yeah.
must be exhausting, isn't it? Because it's really tiring doing that and as you get older, I mean, I remember at one point, do you remember when Michael Jackson, before he sadly passed away, he was in his 50s, wasn't he?
He was about to put on a show. Yeah, it was essentially exhaustion that led to his death. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's way too much. I mean, you think about when he first started. I mean, he was still an amazing dancer and musician. We'll put aside all the, the nasty stuff that, we know about or, that we've read about. To be honest, I'm pretty sure he did do those things, but that's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah,
that was a dodgy one. But I think that's when his career basically started falling apart, really, wasn't it? When those allegations sort of started coming out. But then he always had a cool audience that always followed him around as well. I mean, he had a massive fan base.
He did, really. I mean, he still does as well. But I think, it's he kind of taken a step away from touring and things like that. So that was the kind of the idea behind that, was to do this one last big kind of tour.
Yeah. But it was way too much, wasn't it? I mean, you think about those dance routines, and then they work hard. People don't realize there's loads of people involved, like the sound technicians, the dancers, and all that. And then they made a documentary about it, didn't they? Because
Yeah,
you know, what
yeah,
would have happened, and, you know, behind. I mean, he got really, really thin afterwards. He wasn't sleeping and stuff. And then obviously that's when he started taking that, what was it called? That dangerous medicine?
I'm not too
Um,
sure, but I mean,
uh,
it
yeah,
wasn't good, and he was taking too much.
yeah, it was way too much for his age. But it was too much. So touring is really exhausting. And then you think about people like Britney Spears. I mean, she had a load of problems, didn't she? Because
Yeah,
her dad took over, well, basically her career, really. So, you know, he was taking all the money and sort of exploiting her, really. And then she was making very, very little. And all these people around her were like parasites, and they were making a load of money off her. But the same thing happened to Elvis Presley towards his end of the career,
yeah.
because
I mean,
they worked
these
so
managers
hard.
and things, people who own everything, and they know what they're doing, and they're kind of siphoning off money, and you're not
Yeah,
making as. I mean, a lot of these artists do make a load of money, but obviously there's
cool.
someone else controlling it, or it comes to a point where maybe they don't even realize they've got less money than they thought.
Yeah, and a lot of them go bankrupt as well. Like I remember at one point TLC went bankrupt, and I think
Yeah,
E17. Well, E17, that was another big boy band in the
yeah.
90s.
So they're very much like a manufactured kind of boy band. So they were that classic example of they have a brief run where they're doing very well, getting number ones. That song that's on every Christmas.
But what to stay
Yeah,
enough?
yeah, and but they suddenly realise that they're not getting as much money as they think they are.
Mm,
Yeah, and obviously then you're living like a rich celeb lifestyle, and you can't keep it up for more than a few years.
yeah, yeah. But that's why people like Prince, for instance, were hugely successful, because um they were very particular, weren't they?
Yeah,
Where they wanted to actually own the publishing rights, and so that was very much a business tactic from his side. And I
yeah,
remember when I think at one point Pink approached him to do a duet with him, and he asked the same thing, if she has her own rights, whatever. And I don't think she did. Um, and then Michael Jackson, there was that very famous feud between him and the Beatles. Do you know about this?
yeah. Because
Why did he
he
sue
bought the
them?
rights, didn't he, to their
Yeah.
back
So,
catalogue?
and what happened was,
Because
because
they were one of
Paul,
the first, famous bands where they didn't realize these things. So this is where it became public eye that they suddenly realized, and they discussed this even in this recent documentary, that they
mm,
don't actually own the rights to their catalogue.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
And their
and then,
catalog, is that what means, like literally their entire song base, like every single
yeah,
song they've
exactly.
written?
Yes, I mean, through royalties and things, they didn't even make quite as much as they might have done.
Yeah,
Because had they owned all the rights, and if they still owned the rights, you know, the last remaining Beatles would be making, 500 million. They would have been making insane amounts of money even now.
yeah,
They've just had a documentary come out, so the money would have been going to them. Uh, I know they've got enough money. I know Paul McCartney's got more than enough money, but he would have been making even more, hand over fist.
yeah. And
Yeah,
he's spoken about this. I remember he's been on quite a few interviews, and you can see the videos on YouTube where he talks about it. And because when him and Michael Jackson first got together, they were really good friends, weren't they? They made
yeah,
a couple of music videos, and then I can't remember. He said that he dropped into conversation as like, oh, I don't know, it was something to do about the Beatles' rights or whatever, and I think Michael Jackson said, oh, one day I might buy the rights or whatever, and he was like, he thought he was
yeah. He
joking.
thought it was a joke. Yeah,
So he was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. And then a few years later, he said the same thing. I was like, yeah, okay, it's a bit old, but all right, ha, 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 ha. And then eventually he did buy the whole right. So I think that caused a little bit of a feud, but, obviously he passed away and he kind of let that go. But
yeah.
I
I
don't
think.
know how they get their money's worth then. How do they get their money if they're not getting any of the
I
royalties?
mean, they get other things. They get their own endorsements, and they do live shows. They do still get some royalties, but I mean, obviously, if you own the complete rights, you get, rather than you getting a sort of small share, you get a bigger chunk. Obviously, if you own the rights,
Okay.
rather than a small percentage. Um, yeah, it's just very odd. So that's why you still see lots of bands touring. Even the Stones have just recently toured,
Or to
and
get
they're,
back together.
yeah. So they've um, they're all kind of getting to their 80s or in their 80s now, and they've just done a live tour.
Yeah.
I think that's more, they've got enough money. It's not about money, but it's about enjoying it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I have a little question for you. I thought, before we kind of wrap up,
Okay.
what was the last live show you saw? Who was it?
Do you know what? I feel really bad saying this. I haven't seen a concert in years, but I think that's just generally because I don't like going to busy places with lots of people.
Yeah.
So, oh no, hang on. What am I talking about? The last live show I saw was with Kiefer Sutherland, and
I
that
was going to
was
say, I thought that might have been your last one. I remember you seeing that. Yeah.
yeah, I forgot about that. That was about I think that was uh 2018.
Yeah. What, pre lockdown,
It
pre
was
COVID? Yeah.
pre-lockdown. Yeah. Well, maybe it was 2019. No, hang on. When did we first go into lockdown? 20.
2020.
Oh, so it was 2019 then. Yeah, I remember it was
Yeah.
about an April. So, and that was like in a local church near
Yeah.
me with my sisters. So it was really unusual, but actually he's really good live. So that was the last one I saw. And then before that, I hadn't seen a concert since I was about 14 years old. And that was when I went to visit my relatives in the States. And my uncle took me to see, it was Elton John and Billy Joel playing together.
Oh,
They're not playing.
wow.
Yeah, that was so good. They did a
Yeah.
stint of these concerts where they were playing like their own songs, or they'd play each other's songs, or they did songs together. And it was just at the time when The Lion King came out. So that album, and that song
Yeah.
Elton John wrote, "Can You Feel the Love?" That one came out. So
Yeah.
there was all those songs. So that was the last one, but before the Kiefer Sutherland one. What about you?
The last concert I went to, this was actually 2 years running, I went to see them, was Iron Maiden.
Oh, are they
Yeah,
good?
it was. Yeah. No, they were fantastic. They've always been renowned for their live shows because they're so kind of energetic, loud, but
Yeah.
energetic. Uh, but the fans, they've got like a really passionate fan base as well. So the atmosphere is always really good.
And they're usually really nice to their fans, aren't they? There's one I really, I know it sounds really weird, and I'm not really a fan of his music, but I just think he's such an amazing showman. I'd really like to see Alice Cooper because because his shows, like he's really
Yeah.
actually an actor, isn't he? I mean, he's a really nice guy in real
Yeah.
life. But he puts on this like a persona, really, isn't he? He puts on these shows where he has like a knife, and at one point he's got a snake and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
um,
and that's that
I,
era, though, isn't it? But I think they
yeah,
stick to what they know best, and it kind
yeah,
of works.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
but I was gonna say, talking about concerts, because you were saying that, that's kind of brought me onto a really good point. That some of these bands and singers are really good live,
yeah,
and some of them are terrible live. So you get really good recording artists. Because I remember talking about this with a sound technician I worked with. Well, not worked with. I did a BTEC media studies at college, and he was a sound technician as well as the technician in the video camera department. So we'd always go up to him for equipment, and ask if we can borrow this and sign it out, etc.
yeah,
And he was really good in music, and we talk about music a lot. And he was saying the same thing. Like you get people that are really good as recording artists, but they don't do really well at singing live. And you can kind of, you can see that now because of the latest stuff. It's all auto-tune and crap like that. But before,
I think it is a dying art, though, isn't it? Really, it's not, because it's not
and
as popular as it was.
And there's only think about it, very, very few really good singers that are actually singers. Does that make sense? It sounds mean, but like, it's Mariah Carey. I mean, you can love her or hate her, but she's got an amazing voice, and her voice is her voice. So she's not making it up, because she actually does, she makes home videos where she posts of her singing absolutely live, and she's pure genuine. But then you get ones like, I hate to say, like J-Lo or Britney Spears, for instance, and I like them both because they're really good, like performing artists, but they're not singers. I mean, Beyonce's another perfect example of being a genuinely talented singer. But like, there's very few that sort of translate into both.
But I think, some of the modern music and what's in trend, it's not always stuff that lends itself to live performances, on a big stage anyway. So, you have seen some artists that, specialize in doing stuff where it's all being played through like a backing track. They don't have a need for live bands, and they don't have a need for kind of, doing a big show. So it doesn't lend itself to kind of big live performances. I mean, my brother saw Prince, who was amazing live. My
mum and stepdad, they saw him live too, and they said exactly the same as you.
Yeah, but one of the people that kind of preceded him was, I think it was Tiny Temper, someone like that. But, he's like a hip-hop artist, and everything is, his songs tend to be constructed by, on a computer. So it's that kind of music. So he comes out and he puts a backing track on, and he's kind of rapping to this festival crowd, and you can't really hear what he's saying. But it's just, it's not the type of music that plays as well live as Prince coming on and doing a big band, and he can sing and he can do it live.
Yeah.
So,
and another one, I was going to say, and I'd feel bad if we haven't mentioned him, was like earlier on in the show, we were talking about MTV. The first exposure I had to MTV Asia when I was there the second time was one of the videos that was always on as well was Lenny Kravitz, Are You Going My Way?
Yeah.
And he's, I mean, I'd love to see him live because he's genuinely a really good, talented musician as well. And he's been very clever with, switching up genres. So he doesn't just stay to rock. He does a bit of this and a bit of that as well. So he's a really talented singer I'd like to see live as well.
Same. Yeah.
Like you said, it's a very dying breed now, really. It's kind of a shame.
It is a shame, really, yeah. I think I would love to see more kind of big live performances, but a lot of the people that do the best live shows these days are kind of, they're getting on a bit now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's some younger artists that do okay, but I think, the kind of big grandiose shows and performers tend to be ones that come from an era where everything was about the live stage show. Because that was the main event, really. Your album would always precede a big live event. But we live in different genres now, and everything is based on going viral or going through TikTok and Instagram. So it's not really about big live shows as much anymore. And then people go and do a live show and they look a bit lost on stage.
Yeah, they do, don't they? Do you remember there was that very famous feud between, I mean, they always have feuds going on between these people, these musicians and singers. But do you remember there was one point when Elton John, I mean, he's notorious for hating Madonna because he was saying, and actually quite rightly so, he was saying that, why should people have to spend all this money when she's not even singing live?
Exactly,
and he's singing live. So it's like, amazing. But so he's got a point there,
Yeah. I mean, I think you can separate the show from the kind of singing side sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see what he's saying though.
Yeah. But do you remember I mean, there's loads of people like that, but yeah, Lenny Kravitz, I'd love to see him. Like, I love Lenny Kravitz, Tom. He's my other husband. Apart from Keanu Reeves, that's a film lover thought, but he's my new this film. Yeah, he's my husband.
Yeah.
He's like in his 50s. He looks amazing, and he's still doing really well.
He is, yeah. I mean, he's a bit of a multi-talent, I think, yeah.
But and like he's kind of gone off into acting as well, hasn't he? So
yeah.
But yeah. And what was I going to say? Do you remember we were talking about those MTV Unplugged concerts? They were really good and big at the time, weren't they? And then they tried to carry them on, but they just didn't do justice, because there was a Nirvana one that was probably the most well-known one, and then there was the Pearl Jam one. There was a Sheryl Crow one. There was a Bryan Adams one. We had the Bryan Adams Unplugged album, actually. That was really good. There was I remember an Eric Clapton one.
Yeah, I remember listening to that one. That was quite good as well.
Yeah,
but I think it's that generation, yeah.
There was when he did, it was awful, when he lost his little son, didn't he? And he did that song, Tears in Heaven. He did that one. And he played Layla, which is a well-known rock song with like electric guitars and and that was acoustic, and it was a lot more different.
Exactly, it worked very well live. Yeah. I think we might have to wrap up now.
Oh no!
For we're down into the last minute. This is the final countdown.
Oh, I'm so sad. We could go for 8. That's it again.
Yeah, to be continued. Right.
We'll try to do one where we can talk about maybe a certain genre.
Yeah.
Maybe. And then that might help us stick to like we do with Film Lovers, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think we can carry on. Yeah.
And then we can stick to focus more. We just talk for hours.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sad. Are you sad?
I am a bit sad. So yeah, let's say bye-bye for now.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you, Tom. We'll do a second one soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.